Chapter 7. Jett slid down off Nightingale's back and sat down on a rock to remove her boots and the trousers she was wearing under her petticoats. She'd liberated a pair of overall trousers from the merchandise, since it was better than riding halfway across Texas, showing her bare legs to the world. It felt strange after all this time to be wearing skirts and a bonnet. Strange to be laced into the short canvas undershirt that was the frontier replacement for the boned corset. She'd just been lucky Mrs. Southey was near her height and billed they'd had to hunt all over town to find a pair of shoes that fit. She got to her feet, staggering a little at the unfamiliar weight of petticoats, and walked over to Nightingale. Boots and trousers went into his saddlebag, shoes came out. Her Colts were in the other saddlebag. She felt more naked without their familiar weight than she'd expected to, but they'd look pretty odd with a calico frock. When she put the shoes on, the sturdy, ugly, lace-up kind you could walk for miles in, she suppressed a pang of unease. Tante Mère had always said wearing dead folks' shoes meant you'd be the next to be buried. Tante Mère had been right about a lot of things. Jett only hoped she hadn't been right about this. Jett hadn't wanted to be the one to do this. But White Fox didn't move or act like a white, and Gibbons was eccentric. It had to be her. It was too bad she'd already been to Jerusalem's wall, but that had been as Jett. Few people seeing her dressed like this would make a connection between her and the black-clad outlaw who'd left so hastily. But she was hoping to get in and out before anyone saw her at all. She already knew Brother Shepherd didn't pay a lot of attention to the womenfolk in his holiness commune. Maybe that would work in her favor. "You just wait right here," she told Nightingale. She'd ridden him to the stand of pines she'd stopped at before. It was the closest cover there was. "I'll be back in an hour or two. I hope." Nightingale nodded his head enthusiastically. She'd whiled away a lot of time teaching him tricks, and now he showed them off whenever he wanted a treat. "Sorry, fella," Jett said. "I'll find you something when we get back." In answer, he nosed at her bonnet. It was tied on, but he managed to shove it cockeyed. She stepped out of his reach to retie the strings. At least, if it came down to bluffing, the length of her hair wouldn't be remarked upon. Most pioneer women cut their hair when insects made it a torment and alkali dust made it brittle as straw. And cutting hair was a sure way to break a fever. "You're stalling," she scolded herself. "Well begun is half done." "I'll be back soon," she said again. "Wait for me." She squared her shoulders and walked resolutely away. Gibbons watched with barely suppressed misgiving as Jett rode away, clad in a dress and other articles of clothing that the former female inhabitants of Alsop were certainly never going to need again. She didn't like this, not one bit. If she had learned nothing else from her own adventures, it was the maxim never divide the group. On the occasions when she considered that she needed assistance, she hired it, and then made certain that no one went herring off on his own. Or as one grizzled old, mostly drunk, yet still amazingly competent, gunslinger had said, "There are old shouldists and there are bold shouldists, but there are no old bold shouldists." But that was another story. And in this case, Jett had been absolutely right. The only way to get a good look at that place was for a female to slip in and slip out. And the only one of the pair of them that could do this without giving herself away was Jett. Jett was used to play acting a part. Gibbons was, in this case, unfortunately, nearly incapable of prevarication. Let one of the fellowship out there catch her unawares, and she would very probably speak before she thought and betray herself as no kind of believer. That did not mean that she liked this. Squaring her shoulders and turning her back on the disappearing speck, she headed for her makeshift laboratory. It would be very nice if I managed to solve this conundrum, and we could go charging after Jett armed to the teeth with exactly what we need to put down an army of walking dead. Pigs will probably learn to sing like larks first, but it would be nice. It seemed to Jett she had to unlearn and relearn everything she'd ever known on that walk into Jerusalem's wall. She strode instead of walked. Flat-heeled shoes felt clumsy and strange, and her skirts whipped and tangled around her legs. The dress felt too narrow across the shoulders, though it hardly fit as closely as the demure glove-tight bodices she'd once worn without thought. The corset chafed. The bonnet cut off her vision on both sides. But when she found herself wondering if she'd ever be comfortable in female clothing again, it made her smile ruefully. "Reckon I could be dead by sundown, so there's no use fretting about it." Just as she'd hoped, the dooryard was deserted. It was why she'd left Alsop before dawn. She suspected everyone was somewhere else, at least until the dinner bell rang at noon. I'll be gone by then, she told herself hopefully. She cut back behind one of the new bunkhouses, a dormitory probably, considering how many people lived here, and followed White Fox's careful instructions until she reached the old bunkhouse. The one with no bunks and a door in the floor it shouldn't rightly have. The one that had to hold secrets, because who locked a door that didn't have anything behind it? Her heart beat fast, and her palms were wet as she walked up to its door. She'd stood in the middle of a street, facing down a man who wanted her dead with more calm. But that had been different. Whoever died there wouldn't have gotten up and walked away. She took one last glance around herself and lifted down the bar. It was new. The wood had darkened to brown but not yet faded to silver. Who put a bar on the outside of a door? What was Brother Shepherd keeping in? She felt better once she had the door shut behind her. At least she was out of sight. Even though with the windows boarded up it was just about pitch dark in here. A little light came in through the chinks between the boards, but not enough to see by. She groped among her petticoats until she found the pouch she'd tied around her waist. Well-born young ladies had servants to escort them and carry their things, butlers to open their doors, family names respected enough that they could shop on account. Ladies who had none of those things carried reticules to hold their money, their keys, and sometimes their gun. And because they had no one to protect them, they carried their reticules tied to their petticoat strings, with a slip pocket in their skirts to reach them. She hauled her skirt up enough to take the weight off the pouch's drawstrings, then groped around inside it until she found the candle and one of the lucifer matches. Gibbons was the one who'd thought of them. When they were planning this, it had slipped Jett's mind that a shed with no windows would be pitch dark even in the daytime. She struck the match on the door and lit the candle. The bunkhouse smelled familiar. The smells of sweat, horse, tobacco, and wood smoke were soaked deep into the wood, but they were all that was familiar. Just as White Fox had said, all the furniture was gone. The doors and the floor looked like the entrance to a storm cellar. She'd seen one once, when she and Philip had been sent east during yellowjack season. Its iron handles were bolted into the wood. A chain ran between them, secured in place with a lock. She walked over and knelt down in front of it, swearing softly under her breath at having to pull her skirts out of the way. She swore a little louder when she got a good look at it, and brought her candle close to make sure. White Fox was the only one who'd seen the lock, and that only very briefly. It wasn't the usual smokehouse type, easy enough to get past, but one of the newfangled heart locks, the kind the railroads used. Supposed to be burglar-proof. He should have said something, she thought. The shape was distinctive, and so was the spring plate over the keyhole. But somehow she doubted an army scout spent much time trying to force padlocks. He probably thought the shape was just for decoration. But I've got the key. I hope. Gibbons had given her a selection of keys she'd found around the town. Maybe this was Jett's lucky day. She spilled a little wax and stuck the candle against the floor, then poured the contents of her reticule into her lap. Some of the keys wouldn't go into the lock at all. Others would fit the keyhole, but wouldn't turn. Jett sighed in exasperation once she'd tried the last one. If I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all. Gibbons had loaned her something to use if the keys didn't work. She took a deep breath and unscrewed the little wooden case. 2 heavy pieces of wire dropped out. I guess we're going to see just how unpickable this lock really is. She'd picked a few locks in her time, but ones where a hairpin would do the trick. Jewelry boxes and medicine chests. There'd been 100 different locks at Court Oak. The silver chest in the pantry, Mama and Tante Mare shrieking in anger and fear as the Union soldier threw it to the ground and scooped the utensils out of the wreckage. She spent 5 minutes of poking and twisting at the hidden interior of the padlock. Each time she got started, the lock plate sprang back to jar the picks from her hands. Finally, she gave up. The folks who'd made this lock weren't bragging. The only way she was getting it open was with the key. Where was it? Not here. There's nothing here but dust, doors, and a lock and chain. Shepherd must have it. If he carried it on him, she was sunk, but the key for this lock wasn't small. He might keep it in his bedroom, or his study. She was pretty sure he had a study where he could go to be alone, because she didn't think he wanted to spend all his time being holy for his faithful followers. And he wouldn't want to come out here to a hole in the ground every time he wanted to take a holiday from being the fellowship's blessed founder. If everyone else slept in the dormitories, there'd be plenty of room inside the house. She tucked the lockpicks back into their tube, and the tube and the keys into her reticule, picked up the candle, and got to her feet. I can still be on my way before dinner time. She wanted to believe that, but thinking it was too much like whistling past the graveyard. Gibbons tried not to watch the clock as she paced up and down the wooden floor of her laboratorium. She only succeeded part of the time. When the last of her distillations brought her no closer to the answer she was looking for, she was forced to return to her mental resources. The problem was, it was very difficult to concentrate when she kept picturing Jett getting into trouble. What if none of the keys fit the lock? What if Jett couldn't manage the lockpicks? Gibbons had learned the trade from an expert house invader. Picking a truly professional lock took more than a little expertise with a hairpin. What would she do then? White Fox watched her pace. She noticed he stirred once or twice, as if to say something to her, then subsided again. He probably knew very well that nothing he could say would change her internal agitation, and having been trained in patience by natives, he knew better than to flog that particular dead horse. That's a lesson most white men could stand to learn, she thought, then added, with some wry irony, including me. Front door or back? That was an easy one. Sister Agatha had come to the front door only because Jett had rung the bell, and she'd seen for herself the women weren't encouraged to stray from their drudgery. She eased the door open. The house was quieter than a church on Monday. She pushed her bonnet back off her hair as she called up a picture in her mind of all the rooms she'd been in the last time she was here, and turned left at the parlor instead of right. She opened each door cautiously as she came to it. A couple of the rooms were bare to the walls. One of them had been the library, but the bookshelves were empty. A couple were still being used as bedrooms, the ones with boarded-over windows. All that was in those was a narrow iron bed and a couple of clothes pegs on the wall. By now, Jett knew, she would have been shaking like she had a fever if she hadn't spent month after month training herself out of it. A doctor might practice his profession with shaking hands. A gambler and gunslinger couldn't. She realized she'd found what she was looking for the moment her feet touched carpet instead of tile. None of the floors so far had been carpeted, but most ranchos had carpet everywhere. Turkey carpets from back east for the wealthy, rag rugs or Navajo blankets for the regular folks. She didn't know which Lamar Chapman had back when Jerusalem's wall had been the Lazy J, but the runner under her feet was as lush and thick, patterned with the same intricate weaving of shapes and flowers as the one she'd once had in her bedroom. Back when she was a girl. She clapped her hand over her mouth to stifle her panicked giggling. She was a girl now. Again. There were 2 doors with carpet in front of them. She opened the first and slipped inside. Bedroom, and obviously Brother Shepherd's bedroom. It had a door that led through to the room next to it. She knew the bedroom was near the end of this wing. The room next door was probably his as well. Jett wondered how many of his fellowship had ever seen these rooms, and if they had, how they explained it to themselves. It had a thick turkey carpet on the floor, and a cherry tester bed plumped up high enough under its velvet cover. She was willing to bet it contained a feather bed or 2. There were night tables on both sides of the bed, carved with garlands and flowers to match the bed frame and set with gilded knobs. And there was a highboy bureau too. The windows were hung with heavy velvet curtains pushed back, and the washing table with its inset bowl and china pitcher matched the bed. The shaving set beside the bowl mug and brush and straight razor were ivory and silver gilt and fine porcelain. There was an oval mirror hung on the wall above it too, the first mirror she'd seen anywhere at Jerusalem's wall. Someone here must know about this, Jett thought. I'm going to bet Brother Shepherd don't fetch his own wash water of a morning. She searched the room quickly, but all she found was that Brother Shepherd had a taste for fine things and probably as much clothing as the entire rest of the fellowship put together. Soft flannel night shirts and woolen ones. Fine linen shirts and a taste for good whiskey, because there was a bottle and a glass in the bottom drawer beside the big gilt paper box of chocolates. She didn't notice her fear giving way to anger until she had to stop herself from picking up the whiskey bottle and slamming it against the wall. She'd been afraid when the zombies had attacked Alsop. She'd been scared both times she'd come to Jerusalem's wall. But now? One Sunday after Mass, Philip had told her Catholics were raised on sin, and unfortunately for Philip, their brother Charlie heard him. Charlie went straight to Papa and ratted him out, and Philip had to eat his meals standing up for a few days. Philip had said he was sorry, but he'd never said it wasn't true. Then the war came, and Jett had always tried to keep the commandments in her heart, even after she knew she'd broken pretty near all of them. It had been an actual heathen, the first Jew she'd ever met, and she'd thought they were all Bible people and not real, who told her there was really only one commandment for everybody. Don't lie. There was lying with words, and lying with deeds, and lying with thoughts, and out of all of them, Jett had decided that telling folks one thing and doing another was probably the worst. It was hypocrisy, and even the Greeks about 1,000 years ago had a word for it. They were pagans, not heathens, so she guessed the difference was whether you were dead or not. Black heart and Sunday manners, Tante Mère had called it. Jett couldn't think of anything worse. That was what Brother Shepherd was. Bad enough he was raising the dead and killing everyone for hundreds of miles around. She thought she could have maybe understood if he'd really thought he'd been called to do it. But he preached about giving up worldly things and pretended he was too holy to even eat. And all along he slept in silk and velvet and gorged himself in secret. She would have walked out of his bedroom right this minute and called him out except for what Gibbons had said. If they didn't figure out how he was making zombies and made sure nobody else could get their hands on that recipe, they'd just be leaving a stack of gunpowder kegs around and waiting for someone to walk by and light the fuse. She opened the door that led to the next room. The moment she stepped through it, she was sure the key was here, because it had to be here if it was anywhere. The room was at least twice the size of the bedroom, and twice as fancy too. It had a couple of carpets on the floor, and more heavy velvet draperies at the windows pulled back to show off the curtains underneath, so she could see the windows were more of those French doors. There were paintings with big gilt frames on the whitewashed walls, and glass-fronted bookcases under them, and a desk almost as big as the bed in the other room, carved all over except for the top. On the wall behind the desk there were about half a dozen crosses, and every last one of them looked as if it belonged in a church. The sight of them made Jett a little queasy. She couldn't imagine anyone bad enough or crazy enough to loot a church, whether it was a real church or just a Protestant one. The air smelled of dust and books, and there was a faint sweet scent beneath both. Incense. It made her more nervous than before, as if this room really was the holy place it worked so hard to resemble. She hesitated for a long moment, unable to step into that room. She told herself this was her best chance at the key, that if she didn't find it she'd light out of here and not stop until she was back in Alsop. Maybe Gibbons could think of something else. Only Jett knew Gibbons couldn't, and that was what made her walk to the desk. It had all the usual things on it: gilt writing set, humidor full up with good cigars, a couple of crystal paperweights, a lamp that was glass and brass instead of plain tin. There was a little silver box containing mysterious tarry black balls that smelled sick sweet, and a bigger porcelain one that was full of incense. The drawers were locked, and she was just reaching for Gibbons's lock picks again when she heard the knob on the hallway door rattle and saw it begin to turn. Jett moved instantly. Bad enough to be caught in here. Worse to look as if she'd been trying to steal something. She got herself around to the front side of the desk and had her hands clasped in front of her by the time the door opened. It wasn't Brother Shepherd. "What are you doing in here?" the woman asked sharply. She was dressed in the same kind of shapeless faded calico dress Jett had seen on Sister Agatha. Her hair was gray, her apron was dingy, not dirty, but not white, and her skin had a gray tinge to it, as if her life was so hard even the wrinkles in her face weren't enough to tell about it. I'm sorry. You've got about 10 seconds to come up with a real good lie," a cold, calm voice inside her said. I heard tell there was a preacher man here, and I got me a bad need, ma'am." This wasn't her voice, not her words, but Jett recognized them anyway. Back in Orleans Parish, the Desbiens had been a no-account passel of swamp trash who couldn't raise a crop up out of the ground if Jesus Lord had commanded it to come forth. And Mama had nursed their brats through fever, and their women through childbed, and rode out there at least once a month with a hamper of food and took Jett with her. Mama said it wasn't charity or compassion if it was easy, but Jett had hated to go. "This is Brother Shepherd's private study," the woman said harshly. Jett put her hands over her face. "Oh, miss, I didn't mean to go where I don't belong, truly, but I heard he's a powerful good man." The woman's face softened. "He is. Brother Shepherd speaks with God's holy angels daily. Come here, child." Jett walked slowly across the carpet and stopped, head down. When the woman reached for her, she flinched automatically, but all the woman did was untie the bonnet ribbons at Jett's throat. "I am Sister Catherine," she said, handing Jett the sunbonnet. "What's your name?" "Jaylene," Jett stammered. It wasn't a Bible name by any stretch, or even a proper name. It was the name of the eldest Desbien's girl, and it was all she could think of. Please, Miss Catherine. My brother's awful sick, and he's like to die if he don't get prayed over right quick. Missus, come quick. The babies come early, and Mama's like to die if you don't come right quick. You must not use those honorifics here, child, for we here of the divine resurrection have rejected the evils of the world, Sister Catherine said. I am Sister Catherine, and I will call you Sister Jaylene. She put a hand on Jett's arm and drew her out into the hall, shutting the door firmly behind them. You did wrong by sneaking in here this way. You should have come openly. Brother Shepherd would never turn away a soul in need. 'Twas a skirt, ma, Miss Sister ma'am, Jett stammered. She thought of Philip, laughing at her because she'd been caught in a lie by Tante Mère. You have to believe it yourself, Pippa, before you can make anyone else believe it. They'll believe you if you believe you. That's the first rule. It wasn't hard to let the tears come after that, or to scrub at her eyes until they were red. My brother, he isn't really sick, she whispered. Sister Catherine had been leading her back up the hall. They'd almost reached the front parlor when she stopped. Does he drink? Sister Catherine demanded. There is no sanctuary here for drunkards and libertines. No, Jett whispered, her throat closing with unshed tears. Oh, please, sister, he's done gone and got herself shot, and we were rebs, ma'am. He never swore. They'll hand him over to the army if they catch him. Tyrant Johnson had issued a general amnesty to Confederates 2 years ago, pardoning them for the crime of fighting for their own country. But to claim that pardon, a Southerner had to swear an oath of allegiance to the Union. Without swearing that oath, you were a criminal in Yankee eyes, unable to vote, own property, operate a business. But if you swore that oath, you were a traitor. The things of the world have no place here, Sister Catherine said, so calmly Jett wasn't sure she'd heard her. She started walking again. Jett followed. She forced herself not to look back at the study door. Sister Jaylene was interested in Brother Shepherd, not his possessions. The kitchen of Jerusalem's wall was familiar enough, even though Jett had never been in it. Cook stove, pantry shelves, dry sink, wet sink, and a long marble counter down the middle. There wasn't much you could remove from a kitchen and still have a kitchen after all. Jett saw there were 2 women were standing at the counter, rolling out tortillas. A couple of pots of something were simmering on the stove. This is Sister Jaylene, Sister Catherine announced. She's come to join us. One of the women looked up. It was Sister Agatha, and for a moment Jett held her breath, but Sister Agatha's gaze passed over her without recognition. Bet she hasn't come alone, the other woman said cynically. Sweetness and humility are the flowers we grow in our Savior's garden of righteousness, Sister Ruth, Sister Catherine said reprovingly. If Sister Jaylene has had a true calling to come among us, our blessed founder will see it. Sister Ruth returned to her work, her mouth folded in a thin line of disagreement. Jett stood nervously at the edge of the kitchen as Sister Catherine went to the cupboard and took down 2 battered tin mugs. She picked up the kettle, keeping warm on the back of the stove, but as she poured, Jett saw the liquid was thick and dark. If drinking more of that revealed herb tea is the worst that happens to me here, I'll count myself lucky, she told herself. Sister Catherine handed Jett one of the mugs and motioned to Jett to follow her out of the kitchen. She led Jett to an alcove just off the dining room. Jett thought its purpose might once have been to hold cooling racks for cakes and pies, but its window had been bricked over, and now it was a gloomy place. There were benches on either side of the doorway. Jett sat as close to the wall as she could get. Sister Catherine sat beside her. Now, Sister Catherine said calmly, sipping her tea. You must tell me all you know about our blessed founder, Sister Jaylene, and how you came to us. I guess I can't, ma'am, sister, Jett said, bowing her head. The metal cup in her hands was uncomfortable to hold, but the pain was something to concentrate on. I guess I heard about him a lot of places before I heard a name. We tried, brother and me, to join up with a wagon train up north of here. They wouldn't let us stay above a day or 2. We didn't have any money. She took a deep breath, willing herself to believe so she could convince. We headed on south because he'd heard they didn't care if you'd sworn. And I heard there was a righteous man living here in the desert. Sister Catherine nodded, as if she'd heard exactly what she'd expected to hear. God has spoken to Brother Shepherd, she said. You doubt and fear. Don't be ashamed. Once I did too. Do you believe in the resurrection? She asked abruptly. The question caught Jett off guard. What was the right answer? I guess I'm as good a Christian as some, Sister Catherine. On the day of judgment, Jesus Christ our Lord will raise up both the living and the dead to weigh their souls and cast the wicked down into darkness. But he will not come with a great fanfare, so that the wicked may lie and pretend to righteousness. No, he will come so softly and quietly that many, even among those of us here, do not realize he is already here. Oh, Sister Catherine, Jett said. She'd wondered why Brother Shepherd let Sister Catherine enter his private rooms just as she pleased, and now she thought she knew why. Brother Shepherd was bad crazy in the smart way. Sister Catherine was just crazy. Jett suspected she knew why. I am sorry for your loss, Sister Catherine, she said softly. Jett was all too familiar with bereavement and the terrible toll the death of a loved one took on those left behind. Louisiana had been one of the first 7 states to secede. It had gone out in January of 1861. New Orleans and Orleans Parish had fallen to the Yankees 15 months later. Yankee occupation had meant they got the bad news quickly. The casualty lists, husbands, fathers, sons who had gone off to fight and would never come home again. Many of the bereaved had turned to planchette writing, desperate for a last word from those who'd gone on ahead. Others had just gone quietly mad, insisting a husband, a son, a father was alive, coming home soon, already here, never left. You're a good girl, Jaylene, Sister Catherine said, patting Jett's knee. But I have no need to grieve. Brother Shepherd has promised my David is to come back to me very soon. Would you like to see his picture? She didn't wait for Jett's answer before bringing out a locket she wore beneath her dress. She opened it and held it for Jett to see. There was a daguerreotype picture of a man on one side and of a young boy on the other. That's my David, my angel baby. Henry and I always hoped for children, but for years we were not blessed. I'd given up hope when the Lord took mercy on me. But he punished me for my doubt as well. From childhood, David was frail and ill, but a good boy, and the doctors told us he had an incurable consumption. This time I didn't despair, and again my prayers were answered, for I saw a newspaper article saying it was merely the heavy wet air that troubled him so, and the desert would make him well again. Henry was against it, but I prevailed upon him at last. What mother wouldn't fight 10 lions for her child? And once we had begun our journey, I discovered Henry meant us to press on to California, but I knew we must not. Like you, I'd heard rumors that Christ our Lord had returned to earth. Oh, I did not know who he was then. In fact, he does not yet know his true nature, for God does not send burdens we are too frail to bear, and it will be a hard task for him to sit in judgment upon the nations. But we must not speak of such things yet. All that matters is that David has been made well again. What about Henry? Jett blurted out, unable to stop herself. Sister Catherine's momentary animation faded. Some are called to the divine throne before their time, she said softly. Henry was not willing to embrace his salvation, but I do not grieve for him. I shall see him again when Brother Shepherd, as we must still call him, erects his Jerusalem of fire for the righteous to inhabit. Jett felt as if she was drowning in the flood of Sister Catherine's confession, but one thing stood out. You say David is coming back to you? Oh yes, Sister Catherine said brightly. He died 2 days ago, but our blessed founder has promised to raise him up on the 3rd day. He promised me David would live forever, you see. He promised. Jett couldn't decide whether she wanted to scream, slap Sister Catherine silly, or just run for her life. What she was afraid she'd do was start laughing, the terrified, hysterical laughter that came when even tears weren't enough. Does he do that often? She asked, wincing at the inanity of her own words. Oh yes, Sister Catherine said. Everyone who dies here, and there are many, goes with Brother Shepherd to his house of prayer. Not the outer one you will see soon, but the inner one, where the angels come. There he calls them back into life once more. But not like my David. My David will be special. That must be a hard thing to accept, Jett said, gripping her mug so hard her fingers ached. God does not send burdens we are too frail to bear, Sister Catherine reminded her. Those the blessed resurrected have left behind often hope for some word of reassurance. But the reborn only speak the tongue of heaven, as it was spoken by Father Adam and Mother Eve before their fall from grace. Brother Shepherd conveys their messages of hope and reassurance to their surviving loved ones for them. Perhaps you will see for yourself. I'd like that, Jett said, hating herself. My brother's a soldier. What did you say his name was again? Sister Catherine asked. When she'd been talking about her husband and son, her voice had been soft and dreamy. Now it turned sharp and accusing again. Johnny, Jett said wildly. Johnny Reb. Sister Catherine, my brother's bad hurt. That's why I didn't bring him. I think he might be scared of thinking about passing on, and maybe, if I could just see this special prayer house, maybe I could tell him it would be all right. Only I don't want anyone to know. I maybe had doubts, she added in a rush. Could I see it and not let anyone know? She didn't think Brother Shepherd would show it to her. Not without making her one of his blessed resurrected first. Sister Catherine sat silently for so long Jett thought she might have gone off into a trance. Many people have asked what you're asking, Sister Catherine finally said, her voice so calm and reasonable that Jett had to bite her lip to keep from showing how frightened she was. Brother Shepherd has always told us anyone who wishes may visit there. But he also warns us the angels are often present within it, and anyone who isn't pure of heart will be struck down instantly at the sight of one. I just bet he has, Jett thought grimly. I think I already saw it, she said, her voice shaking. It had a door in the middle of the floor, all chained. I have to see it, Sister Catherine. Johnny, she couldn't finish the sentence. The lie choked her. Johnny was a lie, but Philip wasn't. And Philip did need her. Sister Catherine got to her feet. When Brother Shepherd ministers to your brother, he will take away all fear, I promise you. And I know you are anxious for that. Let us see if we may discover when he will return. When he goes to pray, sometimes he remains lost in adoration for days, communing with the angels and the blessed resurrected. If the keys to heaven are in their place, he is merely upon some errand, and will return soon. He always takes the keys with him when he goes to pray. I think they are a sign to us of the times we should not disturb him. Let us go and see. Thank you. Jett got hastily to her feet, setting down her untouched cup. Maybe she should have said more. Maybe she should have told Sister Catherine she was good and pure and stainless, and all those words they flung around here at Jerusalem's wall a mite too freely. But Jett thought if she said another word, she'd just blurt out the whole truth. Sister Catherine wouldn't want to hear it. Brother Shepherd had said he'd raise Sister Catherine's boy from the dead. Sister Catherine didn't want to hear he couldn't. Sister Catherine led Jett to the front door and indicated a ring of ornate brass keys hanging on a nail beside it. Here are the keys to heaven, she said, pointing. Even though Brother Shepherd has said any may freely enter his holy tabernacle, it would be wrong of me to encourage you to use them. Despite her words, she took them down and handed them to Jett. There were almost a dozen of them, and Jett knew there was only one lock. She guessed maybe some of them opened things down in the cellar. I guess I'll just You want to come along? Jett asked hoarsely. Sister Catherine shook her head, smiling gently. I have no need to peer into mysteries not meant for me. I'll see my son again before tomorrow's sunrise. That's all I care about. I forgot my bonnet, Jett realized as she stepped outside. It didn't matter. Riding back to Alsop bareheaded wouldn't kill her. She was 2 steps across the compound before she realized she should have asked to take a lantern with her, and 3 more when it occurred to her she was holding a large ring of keys in plain sight. She wrapped a fold of her skirts around them and hoped no one would see her, though if anyone but Sister Catherine saw her, she was in trouble just to start with. This had been supposed to be a secret reconnaissance. She'd been supposed to get into the secret bunkhouse without anyone seeing her, grab anything written down, sneak back to Nightingale, and ride hell for leather back to Alsop. And that plan had gone south the moment Sister Catherine found her. Well, I've got matches and a candle. I guess I could set the whole place to blazes and hope that settles things. And get out of Jerusalem's wall before anyone smelled smoke. It was a relief to reach the bunkhouse again, even though she'd have to go back to the house afterward to return the keys. If she didn't, Brother Shepherd would know somebody had been in his inner prayer house. Jett was pretty sure that wouldn't end well. Just as before, she closed the door behind her, then pulled out the candle stub and lit it. She stuck it to the floor beside the locked doors once again. Her heart was beating fast as she tried the first key. The first key wouldn't even go into the lock. The second one wouldn't either. By the time she got to the third key, Jett had a horrible suspicion. She quickly fanned out all the keys on the ring and measured them against each other, then tried 2 more to be sure. None of the keys on the ring Sister Catherine gave her would fit this lock. It's a trap, On Holy Mother, Ita trap. These aren't keys to heaven or anywhere else. They're bait. Anyone unhappy with Jerusalem's wall would want to get into the inner prayer room. Whether to loot it or to find proof Brother Shepherd was a fraud. His taradiddle about people who entered his inner prayer house, without a pure heart, being struck dead was just a useful excuse for them vanishing. Jett knelt in place for almost a minute, panting as if she'd been running. Her only hope was to get the keys back into the house before anyone else saw they'd been gone and tell Catherine she'd reconsidered. You have to. You run off now, and Sister Catherine's going to tell everybody in that ranch house you were struck dead by an angel. And there's one person, at least, who won't believe it. She had to assume someone here could track her back to Alsop. All Shepherd would have to do was burn the town to flush them out or kill them. By the time Jett got there to warn Gibbons and White Fox, there wouldn't be enough time to cover their tracks, let alone get far enough away they couldn't be spotted. You have to take those keys back to the house and tell Sister Catherine you lost your nerve. She'll believe that. She pushed herself to her feet. Only when she was halfway to the door did she realize she'd left the candle burning. It was hard to go back and snuff it out. It was even harder to open the bunkhouse door, and Jett nearly forgot to bolt it again. Jett glanced toward the sky as she stepped out into the sun. Her stomach knotted. It was almost noon. Hurry, she told herself. Head down, keys clutched in her fist, she crossed the compound as quickly as she dared. Hold up, girl, a man called out. Jett stopped. She had to. Any female who belonged here would. She shoved the keys into a fold of her skirts and turned, then drew a quick, sharp breath. It was Brother Raymond. He was red-faced and sweating and kept pulling his hat off to fan himself and putting it back on as he hurried toward her. Where do you think you're going? He demanded. Ah, the kitchen, Jett said desperately. It was plain to see that Brother Raymond didn't connect the female he was bullying with Jett Gallatin, gunslinger. That was a piece of luck. Unfortunately, her ability to tell a convincing story seemed to have vanished. Brother Raymond's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Kitchen's that way, he said, jerking a thumb toward the house. All there is where you were coming from is, what are you hiding there? He grabbed at her arm. Jett jerked free, but the movement had brought the keys into sight. Brother Raymond grabbed them, then grabbed her wrist. Spying, were you? He demanded. Let me go. Jett gasped, trying to twist free. But Brother Raymond was already shouting for help.